My name is Court, and I work here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital in creative communications and outreach. So it's my pleasure to get to sort of host a lot of these volunteer leader, sort of events. If you're not familiar with us, Get Connected is our best-in-class volunteer management software, and we serve thousands of organizations across North America. And we're designed specifically to meet the needs of volunteer managers and volunteer programs. Today on our panel, we've got Elizabeth Donovan, who is head of our Get Connected network team. Elizabeth brings her experience working with nonprofits as well as state organizations to implement tools that support sustainable programming. And she's responsible for connecting communities through technology and relationships. Our special guest today is Addison Waters. Addison Waters is our lead researcher and resource writer who prepares phenomenal ebooks, articles, all types of resources that are just chock full of volunteer management, top tips, and things that help you manage your program each and every day. She's behind a lot of the amazing resources on our volunteer management blog, which Mike, you can drop the link to that in the chat so everyone can have access to that. And of course, we've got Mike Horgan, who's one of our regional managers for our Get Connected network team, joining us to manage the chat box where you can ask questions, share ideas and insights. We always work together to keep this a really healthy and respectful space, knowing that we've got folks from all over the place who are joining us, some people who have been in the volunteer leadership industry for a long time, and some people who are brand new. And so we just love to kind of create that community environment, and we'll use the chat box to do that. All right, I think I did it in 2 minutes. Excuse me, just getting over a little cold. I'm going to go ahead and work on that part where I get to share my screen. So thanks for everyone, your patience. All right, hopefully everyone can see that okay. So here we are together. You can, everyone's good? Okay, good. Thanks. Leading through every stage of the volunteer life cycle. So what we're going to cover today is really just first addressing what is the volunteer life cycle. Again, Addison's brought us a lot of great research in the industry showing that this term is being used more and more, and we're just really trying to understand, as the landscape quickly changes and evolves, like what is this term? What does it mean? And then we'll talk a little bit about the benefits and challenges of actually leading volunteers through each stage of this life cycle, plus practical tips and resources for just holistic volunteer leadership. So stay to the end for those practical tips, and we're going to share with you some, really exciting graphics that just lay out the functional stages of volunteer management, which I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. But then we're also going to talk about the volunteer's personal journey and some of their internal journey that they go on when they're engaging with your program, as well as just some phases of leadership and how you connect to them in that way. So Addie, would you mind to go ahead and just kind of get us started here with what is the volunteer life cycle?
Absolutely. So the volunteer life cycle describes the volunteer's personal journey with your organization and program as they move through normal volunteer activities from recruitment to becoming a highly engaged volunteer. We'll also talk about you as a volunteer leader and how you find ways to connect with prospective and current volunteers by providing them with leadership and training necessary for them to be successful. And as a result, you will have a growing community of fulfilled and engaged volunteers. So I just want to point out that we tend to think about the volunteer life cycle as those functional stages, as the recruitment and the scheduling. But our goal here today is to take this all a step further and make more intentional decisions about how we lead volunteers. So not just manage them, but how we lead them through the volunteer process. And what volunteers are going through internally, and how we're going to marry those two, the functional stages and sort of the internal volunteer journey, as well as your leadership journey, because it's really important. And as a result, we're going to try to build strong communities of volunteers who want to stick around with your organization. And that's really cool and really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone has like their own personal definition of what the volunteer life cycle is, you can share that in the chat. Elizabeth and Mike, anything that you'd like to add here? I know this is a pretty big concept, and it speaks to, I feel like it speaks to two of the main concerns that we're often hearing from the volunteer leaders we're working with, which is recruitment and retention. And so there's a lot of phases in that life cycle that we'll kind of continue to talk through, but I feel like it really speaks to those deeper needs that many volunteer leaders are really working through, which is how do we recruit and retain, ideal volunteers for our program.
Yeah, and I like where we're headed with this. There's a slide toward the end that I was telling the team when I first saw it. I was like, what in the world is this? Because it is just very complex looking. But I think, Addie, you put it really well. It's almost like there's that reminder as we build. We typically look one direction, and we almost have to walk around the box and look backwards the other direction so we can see the volunteer's perspective as well as what we're trying to accomplish, because they're very different views, and what they're thinking about is absolutely not what we're thinking about when we're scheduling something and coordinating it and thinking about quantity of people that we need to get this done. They're thinking about their lives and what they care about, and when they have to work around dinner hour. So I think that piece of like what we see on both ends is really interesting as we move through the presentation today. I like the research Addie pulled together.
And Mike, anything to share from the chat box? Definitions, thoughts on this term volunteer life cycle? Because I feel like we are seeing a lot of different definitions and ways of referencing this kind of out in the professional field of volunteer leadership. And so it feels like it's a big concept to kind of grapple with, and just kind of curious what folks' thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think I was just getting partway through inviting some of the new volunteer program managers who've chimed in as being new to the field at large, but to zoom out kind of for everybody, looking at the whole life cycle. I really love this topic because in talking to volunteer program managers or folks that are working as administrators of volunteer programs at volunteer centers, we hear a lot of times folks getting caught up on one aspect or another of a volunteer life cycle. Like, we just need people to get registered as volunteers, or we just need to focus on retention. And it's really the whole ecosystem needs attention constantly. So it's nice to be able to zoom out and look at the whole big picture here, to consider not just who are the volunteers that you might have on the books that you just need to find a way to get them into your system, but to make sure that you've also got folks who are waiting in the wings, folks who might just be considering becoming volunteers one day, and paying just as much attention to them. Even if they're not signing up today, they're the folks that are going to be your volunteers tomorrow. So I'm really appreciating this topic.
I like that ecosystem word. It's going to be a cool one to think about. It's just, if you don't water, if you don't sun, if you're missing one element, if you don't plant in the fall so that you're ready to see the tulips in the spring, what does that look like? I think that's when tulips are planted. I am not a gardener, but I do like that term really works with me.
We just had Jade chime in, and she's talking about the life cycle, including having the difficult conversation when you're no longer able to volunteer, and how we continue to honor them. And that's a really good point, and definitely a portion of the life cycle of that ecosystem that we need to consider, and that sometimes we don't want to deal with. And hopefully what we talk about will help give you a framework to work out these difficult situations and understand more about your volunteers, so you can be more intentional about how you honor every type of volunteer, including the ones that maybe are ready to kind of move on. So thank you, Jade.
Yeah, that's so important to acknowledge the fact that in this role as a volunteer leader, you do have to have a lot of challenging conversations and interactions. And perhaps that's not often talked about enough. So I thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about some of the challenges and just kind of get them out on the table, since we're sort of already talking about that. I'll kind of hand the microphone over to someone else to grab this slide.
Yeah, I don't mind going through it. So I think the piece that I always want to start this one with is like, this is why you feel overwhelmed at times, because these are all challenges and you keep hitting one after the other. So first, not having clearly defined life cycle stages for those typical volunteer engagements. It feels tough to measure and keep track of where your volunteers are in the life cycle, not knowing exactly how your volunteers learned about your organization. The process of registering or signing up a volunteer is unclear or cumbersome. Your program has not implemented a communications plan for volunteers as they move through the stages. Volunteers don't know how to get additional training or support outside of their shifts. Volunteer leaders don't always have the time to lead volunteers through their personal journey because you're bogged down with everything I just read, but also administrative aspects of a volunteer life cycle, such as scheduling, manually logging hours, et cetera. Those just robust tactics that you got to do every single day are a task on your shoulders. So yeah, I think common challenges. We probably have missed a few. I think that's another, just in that chat box, if there's things that you're like, this would be something to come back to or dig deep on. This is a challenge I'm facing. Please feel free to share those, because I think the challenges are everywhere. And part of what we're talking about today is how do you start to figure out how to even address this huge knot?
There is one question that came up related to that from Autumn, who had asked if we've surveyed volunteers to see why they keep coming back and how to keep them in the future. And that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. That's something we talk about a lot. We've done, some sample surveys for sure, and we do have some resources about this on our volunteer management blog. But overwhelmingly, the response that we continue to see is community, feeling connected to the other volunteers, to you as a leader, to the organization, to the cause, like a sense of community and connection. It tends to be in some of the sample surveys that we've conducted, the reason, and a lot of volunteer leaders are in agreement with that as well, that we're hearing from other ones. So we've talked about that in some of our previous webinars. I would definitely encourage you to check out our video library on our volunteer management blog. Because we talked about that pretty extensively in our volunteer engagement webinar that we did a few months ago. And a sense of community is, again, it's a little bit of this, like, how do you know if someone feels that? So it's sort of an interesting thing. I think that we're speaking to it a little bit today. But that's what I've seen. If anyone has anything to add to that, I'd really love to hear, but that tends to be sort of an overwhelming majority response. I'd be curious what other people's experiences are with that, if they're seeing and hearing the same thing, because I think a sense of community is something that you can't know until you feel it. And that seems hard to measure. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but that's been my experience.
I think some of the things I'm seeing in the chat we'll actually get to in a couple of the future slides about how you develop. But all of this is kind of building off of that point number 3 of like, why did they sign up? Why did they come? When you don't know the why, I do think that's, to Court's point, that's a predominant theme, community. That's why I'm here. But your organization has to figure out your why. Why did people respond to you? Why are some of your volunteers coming, and why and how did they find you? So I think a little bit of that is just thinking through how you can get some key conversations, surveys, interactions going between you and your current pool of volunteers to understand them, because it will be different for each of your organizations.
That's so true. And I also feel like some of what we're seeing as well and hearing from other leaders is that maybe different generations of volunteers have different motivations. Like Gen Z tends to be very, very cause driven. And they tend to really want to get involved because they're really passionate about a specific cause. And then maybe they stay because they feel a sense of community, they feel a sense of connection, but a lot of times their first motivation is that cause. So I'll go ahead and hand the mic over to someone else to talk about some of these benefits of very specific volunteer life cycle leadership, which I'm not sure if that's a term that's been used yet or not, but here we are.
I can go through this one. So there are lots of benefits. One of them, volunteers have an awareness of your organization's mission and how your programming serves your cause and community. Volunteers know about upcoming training, community events, and how to get support in their roles. We're moving through the cycle here. Volunteers feel clear about the importance of their role and how to do their role. Volunteers are inspired and enthusiastic, and therefore are more likely to show up again and again, so they're more easily retained, which is a huge one. And it's a momentum building process fueled by positive energy. Something that I'd like to add is that we're hoping that this is a framework for intentional leadership, and a framework for how you manage and lead volunteers, starting from that very first point when they express interest in your organization and moving all the way through. As Jade said, maybe they're no longer interested, but also keeping those volunteers and keeping them inspired. So this is a really sort of cool key, or I guess, framework for how to move volunteers through this life cycle and keep them around.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, kind of in thinking about volunteers, we've talked about this a little bit in previous webinar experiences, but even if a volunteer, if it's not right for them to kind of keep showing up in person, doing what they have done for however many years, it's very possible that they may still become like an advocate for your program in the community, and they may refer other people to your program too. So part of that could be just where they're at in their lives, things they're going through in their family. And, it can be hard to recognize like some people that have been your your steady people that have come every single week, that maybe their bandwidth is different. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily completely gone from being a part of your organization and caring about your cause. So it just might look really different how they support what you're doing. Mike, anything to add here from the chat?
I was just about to share out actually a link to our blog and an old webinar. There was a question about staying engaged and maintaining sense of community in areas where virtual volunteerism is a factor, which obviously just over the course of the last 2-3 years became a major 4 year. Oh, wow. Okay. A huge area of focus for us and for volunteer organizations out across the world. So I'll share that in the chat. Obviously big conversation, but yeah, that's one that did jump out. It looks like we have a few others I'll chime in on once I get a chance to read through them.
Yeah, absolutely. We did talk about in the virtual volunteerism, recruiting remote volunteers in a digital world. That is the webinar I believe you're talking about. Did talk about some helpful keys to kind of keeping that community feeling and connected feeling going, even when you're digital. So that's a really great question. All right, Addison, do you want to talk through this? We've got our functional stages of volunteer management here, and this is what we talk about a lot. Like these are some of the key needs that volunteer leaders have. Elizabeth, I know you've got a lot of insights on this because you're talking to volunteer leaders each and every week that are expressing, their needs for tools that are going to help them, processes that are going to help them move through these, because these things just don't go away. This is kind of the constant part of the role of a volunteer leader.
Yeah, I just want to preface all of this by saying this is what we're calling the functional stages of volunteer management. So if you were to Google search volunteer life cycle, this is more or less what you would see on the internet, but we're also trying to take things a step further. So hang in there. But we're going to start at 12 o'clock. We're going to start with recruitment. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the challenges of recruitment. And then we go into screening, things like background checks, which was mentioned in the chat, and that can be a struggle for a lot. Volunteer interviews, then placement. So where are you going to put your volunteers? What kind of opportunities are going to interest them? And do you have a process for that? Orientation and training, getting your volunteers up to speed about your organization and getting them inspired. Then we have supervision. So how you manage volunteers out in the field when they arrive, virtually or in person. Then we have recognition and appreciation. This is a big one. This is maybe sometimes we wish we could spend more time on recognizing our volunteers and their efforts, and maybe wish we'd had more data on all the impact that our volunteers are having. And then engagement and retention, in which we're already hearing is a big theme for volunteer leaders. It rightly so. It's really important. And you can kind of see how this becomes a cycle. And, we kind of start from the beginning because we always need more volunteers. And just look at my notes if I missed anything. So I do want to mention that a lot of volunteer leaders are really focused on the functional stages because, this is how we really have to spend our time. But there are some really great tools and practices to help with the sort of administrative and the more frustrating bits of volunteer leadership and management. So many organizations turn to improved tools and processes like volunteer management software, allowing volunteer leaders to focus on maintaining their relationship connection with volunteers. Volunteer management software automates much of the manual work like scheduling and communications and even thanking your volunteers. A big one's tracking your impact. So for each of the functional stages of volunteer life cycle. And the whole goal is to sort of free up more of your time to think about the deeper, more intentional levels of volunteer management that keep your volunteers around, that recruit volunteers that are great for your organization. So you can develop that community building and that sense of community that your volunteers really want to feel.
One thing that's just kind of hitting me even right now, staring at it, and I think I've talked to you guys before about a lot of what is the most challenging part in my mind about being a volunteer manager or director is you're basically, a boss who doesn't get to pay your employees. You have people coming to work for you for free and you don't have a salary to give them. So you have to think about how you're going to get them to come back. I think looking at this circle, thinking about how much time you spend recruitment, thinking about your job ads, going through screening, thinking about placement, you spend with any employee, so much time getting them trained and ready to then make a difference so that they're actually bringing value now to your organization and not just taking a lot of time. I think to Addie's point, there's a piece here that you almost each of you need to evaluate for yourself. Do I spend 3/4 of my time between recruitment and supervision, and I never get to that recognition, appreciation, re-engagement of my good volunteers, and I'm just hoping they stick with me? Do I spend a lot of time on recruitment, but I never seem to get anybody to be able to move them through to get them into this? Where is your time? Where is your disconnect? Because I think they are very applicable stages for almost every organization, but knowing where your time is being spent tells you where maybe that other half, that other slice of the pie that you never get to is really why that ecosystem isn't continuing to keep the volunteers, or where your hole is, because you may be awesome at recruitment and great at recognition and appreciation, but you're just dragged backwards because you're having to schedule them. And that schedule takes so much of your back and forth email time that's what you need to manage in automation. Whereas you really can't replace yourself in the engagement. You need to think that through for each of you.
Yeah, I know something that we talk about a lot, Elizabeth, is anytime that somebody finds themselves repeatedly sending a specific email, it's like time to find an automated system. And that's something that we're, of course, incredibly interested in because that's how we serve volunteer leaders is through software that helps take them out of some of those things. Anytime you send an email, that's the same email 3 times a day, that starts like a chain of emails with a volunteer just trying to schedule them. It's like definitely time to start automating. And so we care about that because, it would be great for you to spend more time doing some of the other more fun parts. I think probably nobody wants to just send emails. At least I don't. So I don't know if anyone else feels that way.
Yeah. I think one thing I'd like to add to Elizabeth's point and just hit home is that having a visual for these stages, that really helps you understand where you're getting bogged down. And, like if you can map out your time, like Elizabeth said, like we're really struggling with screening or placement. And, we have to email back and forth to place a volunteer into their ideal position. If that's where you're getting bogged down, then maybe there, we can think of solutions and processes to get you through, like software or some kind of automation. Like you said, that's what we're interested in. And then so that we can move on and spend time on recognition and appreciation, or like building out really robust training programs where we get to talk to them face to face and introduce ourselves. So it's really like, it's not replacing volunteer leaders. It's really about like, how can we actually use our skills as people, like how can we use our people power to add to our program rather than take away?
I'm seeing a few things in the chat. I just wanted to mention before we get too much further along, because it seems like there's a really great dialogue happening between folks who are just here as attendees. And just in case anyone's missing it, just wanted to make sure that they're coming up. But C. Jade responded to Lauren about an earlier question and was talking about asking questions to volunteers as a way to give them a sense of ownership. And I thought that was a really cool point to make, because sometimes folks navigating a volunteer management software or system might try to cut out steps because they don't want to be a hassle or they don't want to impose on volunteers. But here, it's just a really interesting example of using the tool that folks are going to interact with if you're using a volunteer management software as an opportunity, not just to log an hour or get them to sign up for something, but to have a real genuine interaction with them that helps them feel connected to your organization and the community. And related to that, Lori Boatwright also wrote that they started sending out a weekly email to volunteers, including announcements of things going on within their volunteer community. So band or orchestra shows that volunteers are performing in, an open art studio tour that included 2 volunteers displaying their art. Just thought that was a really cool idea and wanted to share that out with the group.
I love that. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's like makes it a really rich community experience. I think those are the types of things, like just sending those little notes out every week via email, that help people feel really connected to each other, your program, you, and they know that you're invested in them as a person. Because a lot of people do volunteer for personal growth as well, and just like self-meaning. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what are these volunteers going through internally when they're deciding to show up, to give of their time, to give of their most precious resource, which is the hours that we each have in the day. I'll kind of hand this over to someone else to speak.
Poor Court. Her voice is 100% better than she was on Monday. I had my doubts that she was going to make it this far, but you sound good. You sound better, Court. Now, I think this is the other end, as we started, where I was saying, we look at it from that other functional circle so often. The visual helps us see where our time is going, but we forget to do that flip to say, like, what in the world do I look like to that stranger that comes across me for the first time, or that person who got sent a link to a Facebook posting I did that their friend wants them to check out? Like, what are they thinking about? And am I sharing with them the questions that that individual coming to me for the first time may have? So I think that awareness piece, we have to always think that everything you're designing at any point is going to have a newbie seeing it for the first time, somebody who's been with you for 20 years seeing it, and you've got to be ready to know that it's not going to bother any of them if it's on repeat, but you've got to make sure that the newbie is getting just what they need, even if you feel like you've already told that 20-year veteran this that many times. So awareness, consideration, decision, a good portion of the life cycle of a volunteer is really thinking about whether or not they want to work with you, because there are other options out there for them to consider. So awareness of what you're working on. Do you align with their passions? Do you work on the thing that they care most about, changing in their community, or bringing a community into their lives that they've been missing out on? That consideration, they need to think it through. And that's where you really have to put on that hat of like, what do they care about? For me, I care if you're going to have childcare, or if the activity is open to my children standing beside me and helping. I need to know that, or I'm not going to keep reading. Is it something that's going to work with a work schedule I have? I was just chatting with Mike this morning when we both came to the realization that summer is coming and we have children, and that is about to hit us. Our life cycle, as far as our availability, his son, my daughters, we change as soon as we hit summer, and that changes everything. So I have to think about what I can do in March looks very different than what I can do in July. So all of those things come through awareness, consideration. When I've made a decision to step in your door for the first time, or to commit my time to your program, then I think the part that we so rarely get the time to really work on is the engagements part, because we finally got them there, but we've got to get 5 more of them. But you've got that critical person that made it through 75% of the circle or more, finally is inside your door. building something that really makes sure that they got surveyed, they got spoken to, they got appreciated, they felt like it went well, what they were trying to accomplish, or they understood it didn't go well, but you're working on a vision that you want to relay to them for the future, and you want them to journey toward that vision with you, and it's going to get better as we do this again and again. So stick with me. That communication element of working with the person that you've now started to develop a relationship with is so critical. So I'll harp on that, I'm sure, on another slide or two. But I think that's the part I always think about that we just don't get to. There's so much in my day I just don't get to. I think that piece of like getting to the point where you get to really speak with that volunteer that's so critical, that's made it into your environment. What does that look like?
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this is that this cycle is a very normal cycle that a lot of salespeople think through and marketing people think through. But a lot of times we're getting involved in our organization, our causes. We're not necessarily trying to sell anything. However, this is a normal pattern that all people go through when making decisions. And Mike had like a really great story that he shared with us, with which Mike, if you want to drop the link to that volunteer opportunity in the chat and then share sort of about this, but everybody goes through this process when they're shopping for how to spend their time, how to invest their most precious resource. And for some, I would say for most of us, it is our time. We think through these things. And so people are going through that phase. And we've actually seen in the last, since 2020, even more people went online. And this idea of online shopping actually really influenced how people sign up for and participate in in-person things. And so it's very fascinating. We do have a blog article about it, how, just like the idea of how this hybrid experience of like digital first, and then showing up in person. People do a lot of research online, and it's a way that people become aware. It's a way that people consider how to invest their time and what they'd like to do with their time. And I think people have considered that since 2020. Now we're here in 2023. It's really changed the way people tend to interact with organizations. Mike, I'll just let you go ahead and share, because I think it goes really well with what Elizabeth was talking about, especially as, a busy parent trying to determine how you can invest your time as a volunteer.
Yeah, and prior to telling that story, I just want to drop another question that got brought up, just so folks in the chat have a chance to respond, because I'm sure there's some good ideas out there. There's a question from Sarah Hyde about how folks can budget for providing lunches, hosting thank you dinners, just gaining access to those kind of things, and community partnerships with other organizations that might be for profit that would be invested in the success of community organizations comes to mind for me. But just kind of wanted to put that to the group to speak to that question for ideas that you all may have had. But back to the topic of just getting engaged with volunteers. I often fall into the category of awareness and consideration quite a bit. I want to volunteer. I've got a full-time job. I have family. I have other obligations I need to tend to. So scheduling is really important, but also knowing what I'm getting myself into. And so the reason I brought up that particular volunteering opportunity is because it really spelled it out for me, what the skills needed would be, what the volunteering would entail, what kind of hours and time commitment it would involve. And since registering for the opportunity, I've actually had to reschedule the meeting with the person for orientation twice, but we have this very active dialogue going back and forth now, where I'm engaged and I'm excited to volunteer with them. And it all kind of started with them making it really clear from the outset what the volunteer opportunity was going to entail in terms of the work, but also what the impact of the work would be after the fact. It just really resonated with me by just going to one web page as being something I could do, something that I had the time for, and something that I wanted to click the respond button for. So I'm meeting with them next Wednesday to get started.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you knew about them because they were in our Get Connected network. So that link that Mike shared, it's really great. I love that. How can we write these opportunity descriptions even more clearly. We have some resources for that on our volunteer management blog, because it's a huge part of being able to spell it out for prospective volunteers so that they can get to that place where they can consider and decide and become engaged. So yeah, people need more explanation now than ever before. There's a lot online, and getting someone's attention, like just clearly communicating, even just putting like space in between text is really helpful, because if they go online to like look at your program and sign up for an opportunity and it's just like a wall of text, like that can be really overwhelming for some folks. So just like seeing like things that are like bullet points, space, like simple things like that. But we do have like some full resources for that on our volunteer management blog. And that can really help move a lot of people forward. It's actually amazing how powerful that, simple things like that can really be. Sometimes it surprises me.
I just really, sorry.
You can go ahead and speak to it.
I just really wanted to hit home the point about thinking about your own personal journey when you're trying to buy something online or whatever, and really thinking about your volunteers in the same way and see like what made you what made you make the purchase. If you're like me and have lots of things in the shopping cart and never actually get most of them, like what was that thing that made you say yes? And then what keeps you buying again and again? And think of your volunteers not as consumers, but as supporters of a service or of your organization. How can you get them past that point? And that's a big challenge. And I know we keep directing you towards our blog. There's just so much to talk about. But we do have a lot of resources like social media and how demystifying social media, because that's a big one. So I really do encourage you. I wish we could talk more about that, but head over there, check it out.
Yeah, I love that point though, Addie, of really like thinking through, when you have signed up for something you're a busy professional, you've got a lot going on in your life, you're managing all of these volunteers, and you sign up for something outside of your organization or your workflow.
Mm-hmm.
How many exposures did it take for you to really sign up to that? I mean, it could have been something as simple as going to a class and something maybe that you're highly interested in, but just like when you really think about what a lift that is to do something outside of our general, our very full routines that most of us have, I think that can help put you in that perspective. And what I always say about communications is if you're worried that you've communicated too much, you probably haven't done it enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's always the people who are overly concerned about being polite and not bothering people that haven't communicated enough times for people to get enough exposures to what they're talking about to even become aware of what's going on. And we've seen some of those numbers really change and shift since 2020, is that it takes a lot more exposure to an idea, a concept, an event for people to really actually grasp what's going on. Think about how many invites you get just maybe on your Facebook account alone, how many invites to an event you might get. So, really making it clear for folks and not being scared to repeat yourself on a regular basis about your programming. And I'll go ahead and hand this one over to you, Addie, as well, because here we're talking about the leadership, what's going on inside. We've talked about, what's happening with the volunteer program. What are these functional stages? What's happening inside of your volunteers as they're making these decisions? But then, what are the leadership activities that you as a volunteer leader are really like at the core? What are they actually? So I'll go ahead and hand that over to you, Addie.
Yeah, this is all about you all. So the first stage, again, we're going to start at 12 o'clock, is connecting and relationship building. And so at this point, your volunteers, maybe are not yet your volunteers, they're prospectives, and you want to get them through the door. So you want to make that connection. You want to start by building a relationship. Then you want to teach, learn, and listen. So that's all about letting your volunteers know about your organization, learning, maybe that's also training and other activities, and then learning about your volunteers and listening when they talk and when they let you know about themselves. We've talked about surveys in the chat. So what, can you learn through surveys? Do you have sort of an open-ended orientation? So really having that dialogue with your volunteers. And then we have trust. So that's about building trust. How can you, as a volunteer leader, get your volunteers to trust you and to trust your organization? So what do you need to do to sort of build that relationship, continue to build that relationship? And then value. So your volunteers have participated maybe once, maybe more than once. So now you want them to understand how they are valued, how they are impacting your organization. This is really important for a lot of volunteers, and this is what keeps them coming back a lot of the times is one, the community, and two, they understand that they're making a difference. Because sometimes it may seem implied that they know that they're doing a good thing. But often your volunteers need to hear that. Again, just like anyone needs to hear that they're doing a good job, so do your volunteers. And then how do you keep them inspired through your leadership? How do you keep them engaged with your organization? Is it creating more opportunities for community, inviting them to bring friends, sharing your impact, sharing your annual report on your volunteer program impact? What are those kind of activities that you can do to help keep your volunteers coming back? How can you kind of reconnect with your volunteers, even your lapsed volunteers? Sometimes they don't come back, or sometimes you want them, you haven't seen them in a while. So what can you do, to get them through the door again? And maybe it's as simple as scheduling, but we're going to, keep going through that cycle. We're going to learn more if they haven't come back in a while. We're going to rebuild trust.
The inspire engage part is really interesting, and I think I shared this Monday with you all, but there's that part where you think about, and I have seen this in my own life so often, where you go to volunteer and they're almost apologetic that because not enough participants showed up. So they're thinking of like tutoring, there's not enough students there for you to help, or there's a bunch of people, a lot of students, and you're the only one there to help the students and you feel overwhelmed, and there's an apology there. So I think that inspire and engage is so critical. And I think it may play a little bit into Janelle's question about the 55 and older generation. When you're there with your volunteers, if there's too many volunteers and not enough to do, it's a great time to sit down and tell the vision, to engage them with, we're working on this and we're going to keep doing it every Tuesday. And once everybody's used to us doing it every Tuesday, this is how we're going to recruit more people to come. And we need that consistency so the school trusts it, or we need that consistency so the families know we will be there when they can come. So I think that inspiring and engaging is part of also getting them to buy in. I think we said in the chat earlier how you can get them to work with you. If you're sitting at a table of volunteers that are twiddling their thumbs, hey guys, help me. What would be a great way for you to invite more of your 55-year-old plus friends? Because we'd love to have more of you coming every Tuesday. What's the barrier? Is it transportation? Are they not getting the message? Do we need to have a little phone tree going so that this goes out through 5 or 6 of the volunteers that are then sending out an invitation by phone to their peers? What are ideas for us to recruit more students to come in? Do you have any great ideas about how we can offer a bake sale and have cookies on the side as well as tutoring, because they like candy more than they do tests? All of that piece of like what works. I think if I could say anything, stop apologizing, because you're working on such amazing things and you're putting your time and your heart and your effort into it. And sometimes a volunteer will feel that as long as you tell them, this is what we're doing. And today is not the day I planned, but it's going to go better next week. And I need you to help me make it go better. Don't hesitate on that.
Yeah, I love that, Elizabeth, because it's really inviting them to become a collaborator and an advocate for the program. And, I've had experiences where, it was a really small program when I got started, and, it felt like there wasn't actually a whole lot for me to do as a volunteer. But then, because the director just really got me involved in the vision, we're many years later now, and the program's so much larger, and I kind of get to tell the story that I got to be a part of that building of that program as a volunteer. And we were able to have those conversations because at the time back then, there wasn't a whole lot to do. We had very few students in the program, and a lot of volunteers kind of like me, like kind of sitting around like, what can we do? And sometimes we would just sit down in the program, could we collect books? And so sometimes we were just brainstorming together and getting to know each other and building that community before, all the students ended up coming. So it went from like a program with like 4 or 5 students to a program with 150 students in it. And it was neat to be a part of that happening, and happening at more schools than just one.
Kind of a
But you know-
unique idea too, Cord. So sorry, Addie. To just think about like those aging out volunteers, their stories are still so powerful. So if you're able to do a recording of that, retired volunteer who can tell you what it was like back in the day and where it's grown, and that face that no one gets to see anymore, they get to see. That's powerful, and it makes them feel like they're still telling their story. They still have their advocacy position. They're not making it to the side anymore, but they have a strength of who they are.
I just wanted to share something from a conversation I had with a volunteer center manager a week or 2 ago also. They were talking specifically about volunteers who were more in the range of 65 and older, but they were using our volunteer management software and having a lot of trouble getting folks to just adopt using the system, just getting signed up with a profile so that they could go online or go on their phone and sign up for volunteering opportunities. They still were calling in on the phone, and otherwise just referring back to more manual methods of communication. And so what they did to get folks to adopt some of the technology was to host an event. And the nature of the event that they hosted, I don't remember what all the particulars were, but it was for these folks. And it was a little bit of a lift because they had to use a lot of the older, more manual methods of communication just to get everybody there. But once they were there, the first project was to go through a worksheet where everybody got their phones out, everybody got to sign up, and everybody got to sign up for their first volunteering opportunity so that they could get incorporated into the system. Because for a lot of folks, it's not that they don't have the skills to do it. It's just the aversion to like picking up the phone to do the thing in the first place. But once they get it, a lot of times they've got it. That's not going to be true for everybody, but they manage to get a lot of folks engaged with using their volunteer management system by just doing that one push with that particular segment of their volunteering community. And I just wanted to share that one.
I love that because it's like an orientation to just your processes in your program. Elizabeth, I know you speak a lot to like making sure that you're putting that effort. I know you have that story that you use about the 80%, like what can you do for 80% of the people? And you want to share that? Because I'm kind of forgetting.
No, and I'm thinking it kind of goes back into some of our other circles that we're talking about too, but it's just looking at what you do, just like you see what takes the most amount of your time, you also want to evaluate what, that squeaky wheel metaphor. You pay so much attention to your squeaky wheels, but really, what can you do that 80% of the time is exactly the same for every single volunteer? And you want to build processes and automation around those things. Because if I have to do a personalized email or personalized phone call, or I really struggle to get this 5% of my volunteers to do my process, maybe that's just not going to work for those 5%. I want to build my process around things I can see that just rhythm in, so that I'm spending my time in something, building something that will go faster for me, versus if I'm forcing I think round peg, square hole is how I say it sometimes. If I'm forcing it, it's just not going to be worth my time, or everybody's going to be like this. So evaluate where your time's going, but also what goes smoothly and quickly, and spend your time, in Mike's example, if that goes really well, you do that again and again and again. If that only worked that one time and 95% of them got it and the 5% are like, I'm never touching a phone, I will not do this. That's okay. Design your process around the 95%, and your 5% that are critical volunteers, you're going to call them on Monday and tell them when they're supposed to be there. And that's just what has to happen. So it's thinking through using your time wisely.
Addie, do you want to go ahead and explain how we've sort of like linked all 3 of these concepts together to create a key for the volunteer leadership through the life cycle?
Yeah. So when Court first showed this to me, I was so excited because I was like, this is like we're in the Da Vinci Code and we have the key to volunteer management and volunteer leadership. So, and it does look intimidating, but once you we go through it, I think it's pretty cool. So we're basically layering each of the previous circles together. So we have our volunteer journey, we have the volunteer leadership, and we have the sort of the volunteer life cycle functional activities that you would go through, and just layer them. So I'll break it down a little bit with some examples so that we can kind of see how this works and see how we like decode volunteer management. And it's fun. So we start everything at 12 o'clock. So we have awareness, recruitment, connect, and relationship building. So up at the top on the outside circle, we have our volunteers' internal journey, sort of your buyer's journey as well. So they want to learn about your organization. And this happens during the recruitment phase. So during that first kind of step in the volunteer life cycle, functional step. And then as a leader, this is what are you going to do during this stage? So we know it's all about aligning the three. So we know what your volunteer is going through. We know what you need to do to get volunteers through the door. So you need to focus on connecting and relationship building. And so what kind of activities do you have in place? What kind of processes do you have in place to build awareness, to connect with your perspectives, with your community, and to recruit volunteers? And part of that is screening. And then we move on to consideration. So your volunteers are considering your organization. Maybe they're attending training, maybe they're attending orientation, they're kind of feeling out what your cause is about, what you're about. And so what do you need to do to place volunteers who are considering? You need to teach, you need to learn, and you need to listen. And so what activities do you have in place? Go ahead, Court.
Yeah, I was going to say what's great about this, I think, as a diagram that Addie's speaking to so clearly, is that if you find yourself struggling with any of the functional stages, like I'm really struggling with recruitment, then it's just that key into going, okay, for whatever reason, people in the community are not aware of what it is we're doing. And that's where I can focus my energy as a leader and say, we need to build awareness, because right now we're really struggling with this functional activity that's vital to our program. And so really can use it, as Addie was saying, through every single stage. And it's just like that guide for you, like, okay, we're struggling to get volunteers engaged. Well, maybe we need to focus our efforts on recognition and appreciation. And so it really does kind of give you that really simple way of looking at, because it can be confusing to think, well, what is going on in someone else's internal landscape? And so this is just a way of sort of breaking that down and simplifying it, as Addie said, through all of these activities that everyone has to do as a volunteer manager. Like, you have to move through these functional activities. There's just no way around it. But kind of using this as an insight into what's going on inside of our volunteers. And we're going to send you on Monday, we're going to send you the recording. We're going to send you a planning guide that gives you a printable version of this, so that you could pin it up in your office. You can make notes, because it really can be used as that kind of like decoding, aspect that Addie was speaking to of, what are the parts of our functional stages that we're struggling to get volunteers through. And then it kind of gives us that internal, what do I need to do as a leader? And what is the volunteer going through internally? Well, they didn't make it through screening. They didn't make it through placement. They're probably still a little on the fence. They're struggling to decide. So I've got to listen to them and figure out, why are they struggling to decide? Are they struggling to trust us? Are they struggling to know that this would be important? So we're going to send you all of this. I'm just trying to be mindful of time. What you'll see in that planning guide that we send you on Monday is it's going to help you define some of your volunteer life cycle stages at your organization. It's going to help you evaluate some of your current communications and processes for each life cycle stage, which we spoke to today, and just help you sort of develop like some of those. What are those like leadership communications that are going to help you speak to your volunteer life cycle stage? So all of that will be emailed to you on Monday. And I want to take the last like 5 minutes that we have together to just see if Mike's got any questions that we can address before we say thank you.
I think you just answered a big one, which was just what we'll be sharing out and when we'll be sharing it. Beyond that, I think we have addressed most of the questions that have come from folks. And I got to say, having been to a number of these webinars, it's been a really active and supportive dialogue with folks who are here just attending. There's a lot of folks talking with each other and to the community. And it seems like a lot of questions have gotten resolved, but got a couple of new things that came in here at the bottom. And yeah, mostly thank yous. So yeah, so thank you all too.
And Mike, I just want to go ahead and say, go ahead and drop our contact info there in the chat. In case people want to reach out to us, they want to learn more about what we do with Get Connected and our network of 50,000 organizations and over 2 million volunteers that we've got on our volunteer management solutions. And we do have solutions that meet the need of really any organization, program size, and budget. And so we do love to have conversations about that. And we want to hear from you, and we want to hear if these are helpful resources for you as well.
We also do have a webinar coming up in February as well, right?
That we do, Mike. If you've got the link that I sent you earlier to that.
There it is.
Yeah, we are going to talk in February all about volunteer matching. And think that's really important as well to a lot of what we've conversed about today. It's about, finding those ideal roles for volunteers so that they stay in that place of engagement. It's really vital to retention. And so I really do think it fits on that, that key code that we've got there for you is really that part of, training your volunteers, screening your volunteers, and figuring out what's going to be a good fit for them. So we're going to hopefully have a really robust conversation and panel about that in February. Would really love to see you there. Is there anything else?
I was just going to second some of what Mike said. Just thank you so much for all your time. We know all of you are busy, and to spend an hour away from what you've got all around you is an investment. So thank you so much. And I know for ourselves, watching the chat and seeing you all support each other and come up with ideas beyond just what our 4 minds have, I'm so excited to see that. So never hesitate. I hope you all come back again and that you'll see this as a community where you can get some support for the vital work that you do each and every day.
Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you.
Yeah, and thank you for all your thoughts. And I, as the content person, I wrote down so many ideas to help y'all. So I want to thank you for inspiring me as well.
Well, again, thank you so much for attending today. Please look for that email from us. If you have not been receiving emails from us, you can join our Volunteer Management Insider, which is just a really great volunteer leadership publication that goes out straight to your inbox twice a month. And you can join that at galaxydigital.com/blog. You'll see all of our amazing resources that we've talked about. They're inspired by you and for you. And really, we spend a lot of time thinking about volunteer leaders and volunteer leadership. We'd love to see you on that Volunteer Management Insider newsletter publication so that you can make sure to never miss another webinar and get access to all of our free resources. You can also follow us on LinkedIn at Galaxy Digital Volunteer Management. And if you're interested in hearing more about Get Connected, our best-in-class software for volunteer leaders, you can just email us at info@galaxydigital.com, and we'll get you connected to someone to talk to.
I guess it's goodbye. Thank you, everybody.